episode
77.
76. All right.
That's a good start.
77. Oh my God.
77.
77. All right. All right. Leg 77. Let's start with that. All right. Good evening and welcome to episode 77 of the Racing Line podcast. Let's do something a little bit different tonight, boys. We've got Tristan on the line.
Hey guys, how are we all? Thanks for having me back on.
You're welcome. In a few minutes, he's going to lay the framework for tonight's podcast, and we're going to do something a little bit different. We had no racing this week in Supercars or Formula One. So we're going to have a little bit of a debate based on some of the rhetoric that came out of the Racing Line podcast chat this week. And we're going to try to keep it somewhat formal in nature. And the argument being put forward tonight is Supercars the laughing stock of international motorsport, international racing? This is a huge, huge statement. And Tristan will be leading the attack. And then I, by default, for evenness' sake, will be backing him up. And Joseph and Harry will be rebutting all the claims made by one Mr. Ellery tonight. So we'll start with that. Tristan, I'm going to straight away give you the floor. You got 3 minutes, mate. Lay the pipe work for your claim.
There's a lot to sort of decipher in the Supercars talk at the moment. Obviously, you've got a lot of parity and everything going on. So I will admit I did make a statement where I said that Supercars is the laughing stock of the world at the moment in motorsport. I think the Camaro parity to the Ford Mustang parity is probably at the forefront of my mind. What comes to my mind anyway, when I think of what's going on with the Supercars at the moment. You know, I do see a lot of positives. Guys like Will Brown and Brody Kostecki, you know, obviously Shane Van Gisbergen's up the front, winning where they all belong. You're starting to see guys like, you know, Todd Hazelwood show his craft in that Mustang. He's, I think, got repetitive top 10s. You know, Chaz Mostert's doing an amazing job in that car. But for me, it's painful to watch some of these guys who I watch and have idolized and grown up with and whatever. And I know they're, you know, undeniable talent, and watching them struggle, I guess, in mid-pack in a car that, in my opinion, won't win races at all this year. Not unless something seriously changes in the category or in the parity between the Camaro and the Mustang. And then obviously we've got, you know, that side of it as well. It's not something that can be fixed overnight. We're talking about a massive balance of performance and, you know, weight distribution issue that unfortunately is just, you know, it's not something that, in my opinion, can be fixed in the next coming weeks or races. I think this is something that's going to carry on for the remainder of the season.
I like it. And we're going to go straight from that into Joseph, who's going to plead. He's gone. So he shan't be responding.
I think he's going to go get his notes. No.
Pardon?
I'm back.
He's back. All right, Joe, you're straight into it, mate. Straight into the defense. What do you make of Tristan's claims?
I'll tell you where I went. I went to get a drink because I was listening to Tristan talk, and I was like, I'm going to need a drink after what I speak because
I get that
my
a
mouth
lot.
is going to be dry. I don't want it to like make it into a bigger deal than it is. But from what Tristan was saying last week on the chat, I didn't take it personally, but I thought it was a massive oversimplification of the situation. Like just before we start delving into the nitty gritty, I thought that the spread of cars and the show that we've been given for the first couple rounds has been what I thought was really good in terms of car spread and car parity. I think in qualifying, the parity has been amazing. And then my other argument was with the Camaros, they seem to be the better cars of the season are Camaros, but also the worst cars of the season are also Camaros. So you do have a lot of those, 9 Fords sort of in between fourth and, back end of the teens. And I think a better argument could be made that the Ford teams just aren't maximizing their cars at the moment. Whether this is whether they have a better, they need to get a better grasp of the car itself. I think maybe Ford Performance should probably be trying to, at least get all the teams up to speed, rather than we start saying, oh, the Camaro is just so much better than the Ford. Because I think from what I've seen, it hasn't been really that, that there hasn't been much between the two cars up until now.
Interesting. Well, I think one thing that, if I'm just going to piggyback off Tristan a little bit, that would make a little bit of sense is this. So Supercars has been talking about Gen 3 for the last 5 years. It was pushed back twice so that when it did come into effect, it would be a system that was working and effective, and hopefully by then they have all the issues ironed out. Now, obviously, COVID affected the timeline of the rollout. An extra year was given to them in regards to that. But even when you think about how late in the year teams started getting access to things like chassis and engines, etc., I mean, it was almost getting to the point where we're going to have to wait an extra year again for Supercars to get their act together and have this, car kind of ready to go. And ideally, there was relatively limited testing. By the standards of any new car coming into a race series, you almost have at least 9 months of testing that would take place before that. We're hearing 3 months before the, teams are supposed to have access to the car's changes to the design of, of key components for, ergonomic purposes, etc. So even within kind of such a professional series like Supercars is, and we do think that it's a, one of the greatest series in the world, there were things that were going on, with the rollout of this particular formula that would make you say, you know what, the fact that the parity isn't perfect right now is probably a reflection of how, late everything was happening. And a few extra months of testing and aero work and all those kind of things probably would have put us with a much closer, an even closer, let's say, series as opposed to what it is right now. So in relation to it being a professional series, a lot of money from sponsors, etc., goes into this particular series. Maybe the rollout of the new formula could have been a little bit better than it was, considering that it does boast to be the greatest touring car series in the world. What say you to that, Harry?
Well, firstly, I think it's unrealistic to expect the cars to be perfectly on par with each other in the first 3 events. There's only been 3 events, right?
Yeah.
I think computer testing or whatever can say one thing. Like, look at the Mercedes in Formula One. They're saying the no side pod thing is showing better results than what they're getting on track. So, yeah, they might on computer it's saying it's on parity, but they can only test on track when wheels are turned in anger. And I think the show that it's been putting on, regardless of the parity situation, I think the first few races have been awesome.
But that was the point I was trying to make.
Regardless of
the point I was making was that with the series being as big as it is, and kind of, as professional as it should be, there should have been more on-track testing. That's what I mean. Like, we can say like,
I don't think that
everything looks good in simulations and, on the dyno and all those kind of things.
I think like if you stop and think about it, we have seen, not in Supercars in particular, but there have been many instances of cars arriving to championships totally undercooked. We've seen Williams cars with a budget probably bigger than the Supercars grid altogether, not be able to run a car for half its testing time because it's still shipping parts in. The problems that Supercars had this year and over this new formula is very comparable with what NASCAR had last year as well, with the bringing of their new car, and the budgets that they're looking at are astronomical as well. So, and then even like as quickly as this year, as recent as this year, we saw a new Porsche GT car come in, and the balance on that car got totally nuked for a 24-hour race on its first event. So in
The
general,
difference-
I think, but I'm saying like cars not having perfect parity in their first event is nothing new. Like we've seen it many times. And I
But
think
the thing is, in a series that is dependent on having, because it's only got 2 manufacturers, in a series that is dependent, when you got half the cars are one manufacturer that are somewhat hampered, that is not ideal, particularly when like 50% of your field feels like they don't have what is needed to maximize their results compared to the other half of the field. So in that regard, it's not like there's only there's 3 Porsches out of a field of 30 that are kind of struggling with that issue. It's half of the field feel like they're they feel like they're hard done by how the cars are set up right now.
Like of course the drivers that aren't winning are going to complain that they need more power because they want to win. But in my opinion, that's not necessarily what the issue is. I mean, obviously, I'd love to see guys like Cam Waters, Deepa Squale, Will Davidson and Chaz fighting for race wins and championships. And there's still every chance that they can get their season back on track. I mean, I think Chaz is still sitting second in the championship, but I think that's purely based on just consistency, constantly finishing 4th or 5th, whereas, other drivers had DNFs or finished outside of the top 10. His consistency's definitely helped him stay inside, that top 3 position fighting for the championship. But what I will say is, for the most part, the racing has been pretty close. It looks like these drivers, do have to work a lot harder to drive these cars, which is what everyone wanted. I will touch on what you said, and when you were saying about the 5 years in the making, this category, I guess, I know COVID took 3 years of that out of the way, but I know that they did about 100 different drivers across probably equally amount of different tarmacs, different weather conditions, different driving styles, et cetera, et cetera. These cars were well tested before they hit the grid. They should have highlighted the fact that they had some form of parity issue with either the design or the build of the car. All of these issues that we're finding now, obviously, like you said, when the wheels are turning and there's doors being banged on the racetrack, we're finding all these issues with these cars now, which in my opinion should have been found 6 months ago, 8 months ago, a year ago, before these cars even thought of making a race. So we go to Sydney Motorsport Park for the first test, and all of a sudden these 4 drivers just are scratching their heads going, well, I'm not going to win a race this year. We haven't even turned a lap on a professional race yet. We're still in testing. The biggest issue is you've got 60 kilos over the engine bay. You can't move that weight, that you can't go put 60 kilos over the rear wheels and say that's balance of performance, because it's going to distribute the weight completely different to what the Ford will. It'll work the tire different. It'll, there's just so many negatives about the balance of the performance. So
they have put 60 kilos in the Camaro engine bay.
I didn't read that. I read they put it over the rear of the chassis.
They have now put the weight in the Camaro engine bay.
If that's true, then that's massive, because that's
I think but the other thing as well, I with this whole engine thing is that the Ford Performance wanted to run, and having said this, Supercars put the stipulation out. They say you bring what you want and we'll make it work.
So I agree with that. They need to do that.
Yeah,
100%.
So it's definitely on them
100%.
to make it work, because that's what they say. They say, bring it and we'll make it work, and rightly so. But for me, I don't like. There are other things that this year has highlighted that I think are much more important than say how balanced the cars are, because I think the balance will, by the end of the year, it'll be fine. But I think from where we're starting, it's been pretty fantastic. The things I was more interested and I think even more worried about was the fact that you had drivers who actually weren't able to say what they were thinking in post-race press conferences. Well, say anything negative.
Yeah, well, there's like another can of worms,
I think that's a real problem. Whereas a lot of the actual racing stuff, I think, is more used as a what you were saying about the Ford drivers. I have no doubt that if you drop Cam, drop Chaz, maybe even Anton into a Triple Eight car, they will be competing for a championship. But that was the same in the previous iteration of
100%.
car, like two cars.
That's the same as just about any form of motorsport. So
yeah, but then measuring, say, like Chaz's consistency, Chaz will have to, like, even compared to last year or years gone by, consistency is key for him, because realistically the Walkinshaws, the Tickfords, and now even the Dick Johnson racing cars aren't as good as Triple A cars. So like that argument, I don't think really holds water, because that's just been a consistent for the last 15 years in supercars.
So I guess my rebuttal to that is the category had, I guess, 3 different options on what to go in their future. Their first was to adopt like a stock car / Trans Am style race car, so similar to NASCAR, where it's a one make chassis and you put composite panels on that represent your brand. You all run the same engine, you run on the same, tire, pretty much same aero package, everything's the same. So that was one way to go about that. And we've seen TA2 to be very successful here in Australia. We've seen TA1 be incredibly successful over in America. We know guys like Matt Brabham are racing them, and they're getting huge numbers. The thing that's good about TA1 and TA2 is that the premier teams have somewhere to sell their cars to the lesser categories. Like if for example, Supercars were to go, TA1, they could sell their TA1 cars to TA2, which would, I guess, be like Super 2. So that's one benefit of that. The other pathway was to go like a full GT style of racing, which we have seen, work really successfully in Europe. But for some reason in Australia, we just cannot get a GT category going unless it is the Bathurst 12 hour. We get, all those international drivers.
I think it's coming, man.
Yeah, well, I think it's definitely getting bigger and bigger, and it's really cool to see some of these pro drivers step up and make the category a bit more successful.
The last couple of GT rounds have been pretty good.
Yeah, I have been watching a little bit, and it's been pretty good. But the last, my last point was like you either adopt a full touring car style, like what Supercars was based on, or like a production almost touring car, where you do have open classes and you open that grid back up to 60 cars, and you really let the top, I guess, 20 cars go head to head for the win. There's 3 sort of pathways that Supercars decided to go, that they had the opportunity to go, and instead they just went a complete different direction, and they made, this racing category that has no resemblance to what we can sell on the roads, and then no real resemblance to anything else out there in the world. There's no other real category similar.
I think,
I know it does have, I know it does have reminiscence of that of like NASCAR, but
even saying it doesn't have any resemblance of a road car, like Formula One is popping off like nothing else, and you'll never see anything that looks like a Formula One car on the road.
That's true. Very true.
Yeah, I think I don't know. From my point of view, when it comes to the actual formula, the formula for me is very exciting, right? I mean, you see, particularly the Mustang. Like, I think both of them look fantastic.
Dude, they look awesome. I will say that they look and sound awesome.
I think this series is 1 or 2 manufacturers away, from taking off.
I agree. I think that BMW and Toyota and all that need to join.
Kia, like there's a whole bunch of them. I think what the thing that's going to make this formula a success is for them to get like this, for example, this balance of performance issue right now, this parity issue needs to be resolved quickly, because you'd have other manufacturers as well looking at Supercars saying, well, if we were going to invest in this particular formula, if we were going to try to get involved in it, well, then we would want to make sure that, our interests are protected as well. Like if there were like, imagine a team bringing in a V6 engine. That engine's going to have to be
equally as powerful,
homologated as well. You don't want any disadvantages from that as well. So, the speed in which Supercars resolve this issue and get all the teams kind of singing from the same hymn sheet and not bringing up these this disparity in between cars. I think the more effective it's going to be for supercars, but also the faster they'll be able to get, hopefully more brands interested, because it's definitely like the way that they've structured this particular formula is reminiscent of what they've done in England with the British touring cars. That's uber successful right now. I think moving forward, if engines were to go V6, and that's a very real possibility, then the formula itself is still very much in a position to cater for those kind of needs moving forward as well. So I'm not so disappointed in the formula. I think the formula is quite good. I think what they need to be able to do, though, is as quickly as possible rectify this issue so that any other teams that wanted to come in, because the other thing is you've got other forms, like we'll say GT3. GT3 has successfully balanced cars that are V6, V8, V10, twin turbo. Like they've got all these different cars, weights, aero packages, etc., that they've successfully homologated into a really effective series. And if
100%.
supercars can't even get 2 cars homologated with different, geometries and compositions, etc., well, then that kind of that would be, a scenario where they would be the laughing stock maybe of racing around the world, because that's quite a simple thing to homologate by the standards of other categories that have 6, 7 plus cars.
That's a good point. In that exact vein, cars don't rock up in GT perfectly homologated.
No.
They usually take about 6 months to get them into their window. Like I've never seen a car rock up and be, maybe this new BMW is the first car I've seen rock up and be successful from the start in about 10 years. I think what you're saying about the GT is a good point for where I was going to go. So last week, the head of Supercars, the head of Super GT in Japan, and the head of DTM have all met to discuss if there is a way forward for them to all share a baseline, like to share either like a new sort of car of the future, a formula between all 3 championships. And what point was raised for this discussion was, speaking to all the OEMs around the world, we say we want to get all these categories, all these other manufacturers into categories. What GT has really shown is when you can have a category that is, worldwide, companies are willing to invest or willing to build a car that can be then taken around, rather than have like one specific championship for one specific country. Like you look at like Chevy's got a supercar here, and then they're going to have a NASCAR here. They're going to have a GT car racing here, and they're going to have 5 or 6 cars. You even see that Mustang when they launched it with the 6 different cars all at once for the different categories. Big companies are just looking at going, when we don't want to be developing this many cars. So if the ideas of this V8 supercar, formula are then able to be shared or somewhat altered with these other 2 championships, I could then see a lot more, a few other manufacturers coming in, because you have, you already have a company like Toyota who's building these cars in Super GT, and is also a massive company here. You have, BMW and Mercedes who have a great following here, also from Europe. So that idea of cross-pollination could be a real thing if they can all sort of, if they can find common ground. And that's the big if.
So would supercars be willing to then, after investing all this time and money into this current formula, to then make a change so that it's more, so that they could potentially go with like another like Japan or DTM? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying these Camaros and Mustangs are here at least for what they're saying 5 years. They're at least here for 5 years. Yeah. And they've already said the Camaro is going to stop production in 2 years' time, wherever it is, and then they're going to have it for another couple of years after that on the grid. I would say if there was a way for them to all sort of find a common ground, regardless of what they've done now, it would be in everyone's best interest to pick up that new formula. If you're going to bring in the extra manufacturers that everyone's been crying for. And then
So
the only question that you would have to ask is like, what would the fans really want? If the fans, if they do a poll again and the fans say we don't want that, but I think by that time, the whole Holden and Ford thing will be well over.
yeah, so with that, I don't necessarily think that, like, I think the formula's been pretty good. I think the idea of it's good. Let's make these cars harder to drive and the racing better. You know, I think where it could potentially be more successful is adding more cars to the grid. But again, so my point right now, and I know I'm being pretty negative and I hate being negative, but my point right now is if you're a car manufacturer around the world, or you're a racing team looking at potentially putting the money up to get into supercars, why would you want to?
But why wouldn't you want to?
Well, because you're in this position right now where you could pretty much guarantee that you will win races if you're in a certain brand. And that would mean that.
Because
well, that's what I'm saying. You can't necessarily win that you're in a Ford. You can't necessarily.
Yeah, but you can't necessarily win. You can't necessarily win if you're Team 18 or if you're Brad Jones Racing, or even if you're Matt Stone Racing.
That's where I think that the stock car / Trans Am style of racing is the best, because I know it looks like on track that a Mustang's winning or a Camaro's winning, but they're all the same car. They've just got different bolt-on panels. So for the average motor racing enthusiast, they wouldn't know that these are one-make cars. They would know that, they would support their badge and that's it. And they'd be one-eyed fans like we've always had, like we have in NASCAR. Like you say, with Formula One, it doesn't resemble necessarily what we see on the road, but you still see diehard fans support Ferrari. They haven't won a championship since 2007. So you'll still have your diehard Camaro Ford fans. You'll still have your diehard GM, fans. But the difference is that you'll have a racing category that's designed so that the racer, the best racer on track, will win the race.
So what about this?
But I don't believe that anyone watches any racing thinking that the best racer is going to win the race if they're not in the best team, because the whole motorsport is still a team sport. And
100%.
My biggest thing, I've been having this argument with Anth as well about Formula One, is you also have to be careful that you're not punishing teams who are exceptional.
I agree with that.
It is a fine balance.
I do agree with that. And it's like a lot of people say to me, like guys like Shane Van Gisbergen, they only win because they're in the best car. Look, I'm not going to deny that. If Shane was in maybe, BJR and Andre Heimgartner always punches above his weight. But let's just say if, for argument's sake, SVG was in a, BJR car, I don't think he would win every weekend. But then again, I've seen him drive and I know how talented he really is. And I think his talent would exceed expectations, like it did with the Stone Brothers car. He won races in that car, and at a time when the Holden car was probably the best car to be in at the time as well. So I would still think that the cream would rise to the crop if we were given a one make category where guys like Chaz and Shane were, able to showcase their talent rather than being in the best car, if that made sense. I still think you'd see that the top 5 would still finish in the same order, but we would have probably a lot more closer racing between the top 3 positions. And, I will admit the racing from 3rd to 15th has been incredible. It's been amazing. You've seen some really close and cool racing and some guys, really muscling these cars around, which I think in that aspect of the series, it's been successful. But for the aspect of, racing at the front, I think we want to watch people win. We don't, unfortunately, in motorsport really care, or any, competitive sport care, who finishes in 10th place. So
what about
unfortunately,
this?
it's two guys at the moment that are able to win races.
So this is
Great.
the other part of to the equation, right? So we've said that for supercars to have increase its viability, to increase its global reach, to kind of build on hopefully some conversations with Japan and Germany, right? You'd probably want new manufacturers to come into the sport, which would show those nations that which would show those other countries that it's a viable formula to enter, for use of a better phrase. So if you did want a new team to come in and they were going to bring a new manufacturer, what would the process be for them to do it? Because right now, even trying to get a team that has been somewhat affiliated with supercars for the better part of 10 years to have some kind of licensing contract is a huge deal. So if you wanted, I don't know, Kia to start some kind of race team and they wanted to enter, or BMW to kind of establish their own factory team as opposed to, affiliating with an existing team that's on the grid, being open to expanding the grid so that you could bring in those new manufacturers if the need arose. That would be a stepping stone based on the current squabbling that's going on, within supercars land for racing contracts.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a tough one. Like with the new manufacturers, it's pretty hard because I know not too long ago, probably at least in this decade, we were talking about I think Alfa Romeo joining, maybe with Gary Rogers. I think Toyota were in talks of joining, Kia I think were as well, and obviously BMW were looking at joining with Walkinshaw. But it didn't happen, and it was pretty weird that it didn't happen because there was a lot of rumors that Walkinshaw weren't going to run a Ford or weren't going to run a Holden or Camaro, when the new cars came out, and everybody just assumed that they were going to run BMWs because they were pretty closely linked to BMW, and it just never happened. I think the reason for that is just commercial appeal, and for these big manufacturers to go and invest millions of dollars, of setting up factories and hiring personnel, they, to get, I don't know, so few, I guess, in the global spectrum of viewers compared to what they might get out of, global DTM, or sorry, it's not DTM anymore, like the GT cars or, even, I guess, Formula One. The commercial appeal of that is so much higher. They're going to sell more cars just by being a part of those series.
Do you also think the fact, like in hindsight, the fact that when you look back at the teams who have joined supercars, you look at you had Mercedes joined with Erebus, you had Volvo joined with Gary Rogers Motorsport, and you had Nissan joined with the Kelly brothers. Without throwing any shade or being negative, none of those teams were ever really in the position to make one of those newcomers, competitive day in and day out. Gary Rogers had the best shot, and you would say out of those three teams had the most experience and was the best run team. But and you could tell that in results, like they got race wins and the racing up the front. But even still, like they never were able to have a star-studded two-driver lineup.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good point.
Yeah. Do you think that the fact that none of those new manufacturers were successful has hurt new manufacturers coming in again, because there's no sort of blueprint of one coming in and actually winning, and actually winning consistently?
I mean, it definitely
that's probably
could
the
have
biggest
something
thing.
to do with it. Yeah, it could definitely have something to do with it. I just had a thought, like, I know a little bit off topic, but I just like, it would be pretty cool if you had, let's just say they stuck with their 26 cars in a grid and you had 18, oh, I'm bad at maths here. Come on now. Jesus Christ, 14 different manufacturers on the grid. Imagine that, like each team has their own manufacturer. Wouldn't that be just the best thing ever?
Well, British Supercars do something very similar.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they're British touring cars, aren't they? BTCC.
Yeah. British touring cars do something sort of like that. But like, for me, when I think about it, if say a Volvo had joined with Dick Johnson Racing with Penske money coming in, you know, like
that won't happen. They're Ford, but yeah.
you know, like
I know what you mean.
In hypothetical
Yeah.
land, you would expect that then, like if one of those manufacturers had made a real fist of it and had instant success, that a blueprint would have been laid for other teams. I think that has never really caught fire. So it's
it's a good point. It probably comes down to, I guess, the car manufacturer and what kind of car they make, you know, for that series, what they're trying to accomplish out of it. You know, I think the Volvo thing, it didn't quite work because I don't think a lot of people were lining up to buy, you know, Volvos, even though they did look pretty cool, but they weren't lining up to buy a Volvo when you could buy the Ford BA Falcon that was next to it.
I think it's more because the teams, they just like, even look at like Nissan with Kelly brothers, Kelly brothers got probably their best years with the Ford after the Nissan, but also they probably got their best investment and brought in the best new talent into the actual manufacturing side of the team after they fucked Nissan off. So I'm like you sort of, if you had sort of had that infrastructure and then brought in someone, it might have been a different story.
Because we did see that those Nissan Altimas were quite competitive in Super 2. I actually think I don't know if they're Super 3 now. I think they are because of the second gen cars. But
in Super 2,
Nissan and Altimas won. Yeah, they won
with
Forward and then Matt Payne and then well, Matt Payne didn't win the championship, did he? Declan Fraser did.
Thomas Randall won in the Nissan, didn't he?
There was, Thomas Randall as well. That's the other one. They won two Super 2. Might be 3, but they won definitely 2 Super 2 championships. The car was pretty good.
See, herein lies the rub. So the car was really good, and they all won it again in the same team. So is it that there was one team in that championship who was able to So for me, it's always how competitive is it? But you also you have to take into consideration that some teams are just better than others, just like in Aussie rules or rugby league.
100%.
Not everyone's playing with this. When we watched State of Origin, there was years when it doesn't matter how hard New South Wales tried, you couldn't accommodate for Billy Slater and Cam Smith and Jonathan Thurston and Justin Hodges, and the list goes on. So
as a Queenslander, I just got to say that was the best time. So no, I'm joking. But I do know what you're saying. I do know what you're saying.
Imagine if in that time we said, hey, this State of Origin's getting a little bit uncompetitive.
Let's drop some players.
Just give us half. I'm like that.
Yeah,
there is a give and a take.
100%. And that's what you're going to get with every competitive sport. There's always going to be, a threshold, a middle ground where it's like, you know what, these guys are just too good. And that's, in my opinion, where Triple Eight are right now. I know Erebus are doing everything they can, and I've got to take my hat off to Brody Kostecki and Will Brown, because I mean, especially that driver Brody against Shane. We're talking about one of the highest rated drivers in the world. Brody's putting his arms out and pretty much beating him most of the times out this year. Actually, I think he's beaten him 3 out of the 5 times they've gone head to head.
I was actually most impressed when he lost the race, but kept him behind him for those 2 laps.
Yes, 2 laps, man. 2 laps.
Obviously, it wasn't the whole race, but just the mongrel that he showed in that first race at Wanneroo, that was actually what gave me the greatest.
I agree, man. I had Shane Van Gisbergen behind me at the 6 hour, and I went to myself in my own, ego way, I'm not letting this bloody guy go.
How long that last?
Thanks, man. I think it lasted half a lap.
Well, there you go. At least you got half a lap. I've got nothing.
I kept him behind me all the way across the top, and he was sticking his nose in everywhere. And I was just like, nah, he's not going to get me. I've got him. Nah, I've got him. And he did this half fake move. So I sort of half covered him. And then on the exit, the second I put my foot down on the accelerator, I went, he's got me here. And then bang, fires it out and passes me down the straight, gets the slipstream and gets me. And I'm just like, yep, he set me up from that halfway across the mountain, he knew. So that's just the smarts that he has behind the wheel, and for Brody to be, pretty much neck and neck with him. Well, Brody's leading the championship. He's the man to beat at the moment. So,
what drivers have you been pleasantly surprised with this year? I would say like there's Brody. I think
definitely
Payne
Will
has
Brown.
showed things. Will Brown, but like Will Brown, I'm not really surprised with anymore.
Yeah,
like,
that's true. I've always been impressed with Will and Brody, and I actually think Todd Hazelwood's one of my gun performers at the moment. I think he's been qualifying like top.
He's been
I
qualifying.
think he's
really
like
well.
top 6 or something just about every race.
Golding.
Todd Hazelwood's definitely
my driver of
dude.
the season so far.
Golding's always my most underrated driver. I think
Jimmy
he
Golding
is insanely talented.
Mate, if he for whatever reason he couldn't qualify at Wanneroo, but he's been just making up positions all year. Like he's been phenomenal. Like for use of a better phrase, phenomenal.
He's driving like he's got something to prove, because I guess in a sense he does. But dude, it just suits his driving style, just being so aggressive behind the wheel. I've been very impressed with him. I will admit he's probably in my top 10 for drivers in Australia at the moment.
What have you thought of Mark Winterbottom's year this year? Because me and Airford were talking about this last week, or last time we discussed it.
What do you guys think about it? I'd be interested.
I'm on the impression. I've been on this impression for a couple of years. I think he must bring Team 18 the sponsorship money, but I haven't seen him bring anything. If that's what he's bringing, I haven't seen anything else.
Yeah.
Here's my caveat as well. Like I've seen glimpses of Scott Pye. He's had a lot of, and he's had a lot of those, what are they, fuel line problems or power steering problems.
Fucking power steering every second race. It's like literally bingo. It just happens.
Look, man, I think the same about guys like Winterbottom and Courtney, and I guess even Whincup and Lowndesy. They've been there for so long that I guess to some extent they still deserve their drive on the grid, because they are still somewhat competitive. I'm not saying that I think maybe they should potentially look at maybe moving on, but if they're still able to be competitive and compete, I'd do it.
That's my thing though. Do you think he from the last couple of years' results, he has been competitive?
Yeah. Look, he has been sneaking inside the top 10 a few times. I think he got a couple of podiums last year, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe just missed out on podiums, but I think he's still got like top 10 pace, which in that field is pretty good, because the top 10's bloody good.
He's as competitive as that car's going to be. Like, I don't think.
Yeah, that's probably the best way of putting that. Yeah.
Because, we were talking about it a couple of weeks ago then Courtney has got 2 podiums since. I mean, Davidson for the last 18 months has been.
Yeah, man.
He's been better than De Pasquale.
Well, Davidson was on a 12-month lease and he's still there. So that goes to show how talented he is. And I don't think he's looking at stepping aside anytime soon.
I'll be honest with you. If I'm Triple Eight, and if I'm DJR right now, I'm a little bit worried, because the old fella is making the young bloke look ordinary.
Dude, you can't beat experience, man. Not in this game.
You can't beat experience. He's doing a really good job, and I'm really impressed with that. And he was probably the one thing that I looked at and said, you know what? If there's someone who's making, like, even Courtney, to be frank,
Courtney's still doing a great job, man. I'd love to see these young kids get in there, and some of these younger kids jump through and get more cars on the grid, whatever. But like I said, you can't beat experience, and these old boys are still showing these young cars how to do it. So like I said, I'm not saying that Winterbottom has been lighting it up for me, but he still does sneak into the top 10, which I think for that car and obviously him and his career is still remarkable and a true testament to his talent. Same as when, Davidson and Courtney, they're still doing it. There was a guy that I just thought of that we actually haven't even mentioned. Complete opposite ends of the conversation that we're having right now.
Matt Payne.
Matt Payne, but Brock Feeney.
Yeah.
Dude, he's actually probably been, my number one this year. I can back that up too, because with the Bathurst 12 hour, Triple Eight put a lot of their eggs into his basket. I think to try and put a little bit more pressure on him for this season at Supercars.
Yeah.
And man, he's had some remarkable drives the last 8 months.
But that's only because the Camaro is so good. There's no Ford drivers who can get in front of him.
There you go. No,
That's your argument. That's not
dude,
my argument.
but he's still got to beat other Camaro drivers, man. So you know what? They might still be in the best car, they might be in the best team, but you still gotta beat all of the Camaro drivers. And there's some bloody good drivers in those cars. So
he's definitely stepped up from like that rookie status, that's for sure.
100%.
Like there's no when you watch him race now, there's no sort of giving up easy positions or looking timid.
I see a lot of win cup in him. I think he's been nurtured really well.
Yeah.
Especially during this part of his career. I think they used last year sort of as a, just like a blanket to make him feel a bit more comfortable in the class. And
who are his mentors? Win Cup,
Lowndes, Shane Van Gisbergen. He's got Mark Dutton, one of the best supercars engineers. Who's the other one? Who's his actual head engineer?
Oh, the new Alistair.
Alistair. Is it McVeigh? No.
McVeigh. Alistair McVeigh. Yeah.
Yeah. You got two of the brightest engineers in the country, and he's got the benefit of looking at the goats, 2 of the goats data, 3 of the goats data.
And he's got a Red Bull helmet that should give you 1/10 as well.
Yeah, I think so. I reckon if I had a Red Bull sticker on mine,
it's got no visor, so minus 5/10. Visorless helmets, man. They irk me like to no end.
I've never run one, so I wouldn't know. But I a lot of my mates run them, and they reckon they're the best thing ever.
Visorless.
Someone who was running visorless has upgraded has upgraded from in Supercars, upgraded from visorless to visor this year.
Oh, really?
I can't remember who it was.
It's not Shane, is it?
Well,
no, it's not Shane.
No, Shane's back with the visor. But Justo Jada has been driving visorless for the longest time, and he went to a visor this week. I saw that.
True.
Yeah,
didn't even know that.
He's
he's killing it at the moment.
Yeah, he's been pretty good,
mate. He's I didn't really think this time last year that he was worthy of a supercar seat, but I've definitely done a 180 on that opinion, because like after his 6-hour efforts, after his efforts on the weekend in that GT, he's having a really, really, really good run at the moment.
Just hope he's given a chance.
He was actually the point I made last week about Mark Winter. I said, if you were to substitute Mark Winterbottom, bring in someone like Ojeda, let him sit in that car for a year, maybe average 2 or 3 spots worse a race, say on an average, but then have the time to sort of be nurtured and learn.
There's a few guys though, man, that I think that are pretty worthy of a seat.
You can take your pick. Like I'm just using him as an example.
I think if I were to pick the next 3 guys that I think should or deserve a supercar seat, I think Joseph Mawson is at the top of that list.
Yeah.
I think. Look, man. It's tough, but I definitely think Jaden's deserved it, and I think Zane Goddard deserves another shot. And then my probably runners up to that would be the 2 Kostecki boys. I think Jake and Kurt both deserve to be on the grid. I know I'll probably get a lot of slack for that, but I think Kurt.
I don't know about Jake.
I think
Jake. I mean, yeah. Look, he didn't have the best run in that tradie car, but then also neither did Declan Fraser. So I think out of the 4 cars in Tickford, that's by far the absolute worst. When Jake was at Matt Stone, he was a young kid. He was still, a little bit immature. He definitely, I saw a lot of progression towards his, the end of his stint in the tradie car. Unfortunately, he just got in a lot of crashes, and I think, they used his little altercation as a scapegoat to get rid of him. But, I saw a lot of potential there. And for Kurt, I always thought he was very talented. It was a shame. It was a shame to see him on the sidelines.
Has Kurt had a run in supercars, like a proper run? I know he was with
I think he did wild cards, man. I'm not sure if he actually.
But that's it.
I don't think he ever made a debut.
No, I don't think so. I think he's only done Walkinshaw wild
Yeah.
cards.
But
Yeah.
that would be my 5, I reckon, at the moment. And then obviously you got some of these young kids coming through Super 2 who I think, have some pretty big futures.
I will say this though as well with the 3 Kostecki boys, as unfortunate as it is, even in Super 2s though, by the time they all got out of it, the one that we've got left was the best back then, and sort of how that survival of the fittest works.
Yeah, man.
He's making such a good run at it at the moment. And
I've been pretty lucky, man. I've been in the passenger seat of a lot of drivers, and I think Shane's always probably the best, and then I reckon Brody and Chaz are like on par. So that's in my opinion, a true testament of his talent. That he's very talented.
I didn't expect it. Like, I didn't expect the step up this year, like how good it has been, but it is surprising me how I always thought he'd play second fiddle to Will Brown. And I'm really like reevaluating that whole idea, because I think Will Brown, I think, can be faster, but I think when Will Brown's off, he's off worse than Kostecki's never really off. Like, he always seems to be able to, like, if he stays on the track, he just manhandles the result. He's
I think manhandle's a pretty good key word there, man, because he definitely does. He grabs that wheel by the scruff of the neck and just throws it around. And he even did that in the 86 or whatever it was around Norwell. He just threw this car around, but it was still so smooth. You're just thinking, like, how you're driving this car this hard, but like using pretty much no tire. It just doesn't make sense. But it is that Shane Van Gisbergen style of driving. I think I believe he went over to America and did like speedway stuff when he was younger. And I think that like car control sort of background helped him with where he's at right now. And it's a similar sort of story to, Shane doing like drifting and rally and that when he was a kid. It's the same sort of spectacle, you got the same sort of feel in the seat. And that's why I think particularly in these cars, you're just able to see these guys' true talent.
100%.
I think we'll leave it there, boys. What a great chat.
Mate, it's been awesome.
No worries.
Tristan?
Unlucky Harry had to leave us because his internet is dog shit.
Yeah, that's all good. No, that's all right. I was looking forward to hearing what he has to say, but maybe we'll have to make up for it next time.
Let him speak.
Yeah, for once, no. No, boys, that was great. Thanks so much for having me on. I know we spoke about a lot of some probably red flags across a lot of motorsport enthusiasts, but
that was good.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to get it all off your chest, I reckon.
Was it cathartic for you, mate?
Yeah, always.
There you go. All right, Harry, Tristan, Joe, thanks so much for jumping on. Harry, thanks for being on early before your internet cut out as well. So everyone, again, thanks for your time. Thanks for listening. Hope you took something away from tonight's chat. Supercars is back, I think, next weekend at Tasmania.
Yes, sir, Tassie.
So hopefully,
who's your pick before we go? Who's your top 3? Actually, this is a good chat.
I've got a Smokey. I got Winterbottom for a podium.
Okay. He does go pretty good there, I think.
He's got a reputation.
He goes very well there.
Yeah.
I was going to say.
So I'm going to say.
Yeah, if you go, give us your 3.
I'm going to say, like, point. It's a triple header. It's a 3-round, right? So it's.
Yeah, I think they've got 3 on there.
It's 3 little races.
I'm going to say Feeney, Brody, Mostert.
That's your top 3 points or your 3 winners?
Top 3
Is that for the round?
Yeah.
Okay.
Round points.
Walkinshaw don't do very well.
I think SVG's going in the kitty litter at the hairpin one race.
No. Dude, now it's going to happen. You're going to jinx him.
No,
I'll be happy, mate. I'm a Ford boy. Ford through and through.
Nice. Me too.
So that's mine.
What about you, Joe?
Walkinshaw don't do very well at Tasmania, to be honest. So I wouldn't put. I think Chaz has had a few decent results because it's Chaz, but as a team,
yeah.
As a
He's gonna
team,
do
they
a
don't
four.
do-
He's gonna do a 4-tire strategy. Wait for it. That's gonna be what does it.
I'm gonna say on points, it's gonna be. I'm gonna put the 2 888 boys in there, and I'll put in Chaz.
Okay.
But I know I would love to see the stats, but I don't think 888 hasn't won there for a couple of years at least.
I think Tasmania could be a good track for the Mustangs because it's not as long, so you won't get the speed advantage on the straights like the Camaros are getting at the moment. I still don't think that'll change anything. I think he will still have Shane on top. I think he has to get a big haul of points to keep his championship, alive.
Shane,
I think
isn't he back?
he's third, but
Yeah.
he's about 120 points behind. So
Man, that's change for him.
I know that's
He
nothing.
won by 500 last year.
I know, man. I know. But I've got Shane winning. I'll probably go Brody Kostecki and maybe Chaz or Will Davidson.
Will Davidson, I like that.
Yeah, I think he actually goes pretty good there. So
He does. He
don't have
does.
to
should
play
be.
too long.
Look. Despite everything that I said about Supercars before, it should be a really good weekend of racing because Tasmania always lights it up.
Still agree. Have to agree with that one. All right, boys. I think we'll leave it there for tonight. Epic